Welcome to Dollars and Cents. Our podcast is designed to provide listeners with financial advice in a language you can understand. Created and hosted by Marc Freedman, President and CEO at Freedman Financial, he discusses timely topics that help individuals and families make smart financial decisions. Count on lots of energy, candid discussion, and a few laughs. And now, here's your host of Dollars and Cents, Marc Freedman of Freedman Financial.
Welcome back to another edition of Dollars and Cents with Freedman Financial. My name is Marc Freedman.
And I'm Marion Gilman.
And we're here to provide you with some financial advice in a language you can understand. Last week, we were at Northwestern University for an executive ed program.
It was really fascinating.
It really was. Some really interesting professors, lots of things to talk about. Yeah. They really have some interesting insights.
They certainly do. And I learned a little bit about AI. Not that I want to use it, or not that I'm prepared to use it, but I don't think it's going to take over the workforce.
No, but interesting. Just for our viewers here, AI stands for
artificial intelligence.
We live in a world of acronyms, and there was certainly plenty of those that were shared with us when we were at Northwestern University. And so
absolutely.
I'll tell you a little funny insight because it's been one of those things where we have grown, especially in this political landscape that we're in, the news landscape that we're in. Everybody is getting their information from sound bites or headlines or whatever, and taking that headline and stating, oh, that must be true. So, interesting story. A gentleman who is a professor of artificial intelligence at Northwestern was telling us some stories about artificial intelligence. Look, he built the coding. He did the coding for Uber Eats and Uber and several other places. A great resume.
He was a fascinating speaker.
He really was. But he showed a lot of slides up. But one fact that I thought was interesting is he was talking to about 100 plus financial advisors in the room in Northwestern. And he says, did you know that the Indian population in America represents about 1.5% of the population, yet they pay 32% of income taxes in America? And I
fascinating, right?
I thought that was interesting. And
by the way, not American Indian, but Indian.
Yeah,
from India.
From India, Indian folks
of
that have come over.
heritage, correct.
And I thought that was interesting. I did want to question it, but in those kinds of settings, that it was more of a lecture setting than it was more interactive, and so there wasn't the space for that. And so I saw a lot of people write down that quote, and it made me think, where'd that information come from? If he's such an AI guy, I'm sure he's got some background information, et cetera, to help justify where that came from. Because I'm thinking there's been, as a Jewish American, I've heard that there's 2.4% of the population is Jewish in America. Made me wonder, I wonder what percentage Jewish Americans are paying for income taxes as a percentage of the total number.
Sure.
So I sent him a note over the weekend. And I asked him if he could help me understand the source content that he had to get that number, because perhaps I could look into it and find out what the Jewish number was. And he surprised me with the answer. I thought I was going to get some straight little links. Here's how I came up with the number. And he said, don't quote me on that.
Now remember, this is a professor at the business school at Northwestern University, which is actually a very prominent business school.
The Kellogg School of Business.
Exactly.
And he says, don't quote me on that. I cobbled that together from some pieces of information that I gathered. So it's my belief that that's the case. Now, it's interesting he says that now in the response email, because that's not how he presented it at Northwestern. And it made me think about all of the stuff that we hear in the media. When we hear someone make a statement and then it gets carried and carried and carried, and we believe it to be true without the supporting facts that go along with it. And so when we go into financial planning...
Absolutely. Well, you know what? I do want to say one other thing. There is a statistic that shows that the more times that you see a certain statement, the more belief you have in that statement. So although you might have doubted it the first time, if you see it a second time, then a third time,
must be true.
It must be true.
Yeah. So it made us start to think about some of the if you want to call them old wives' tales, or the statements that we see, whether it's from television, from people that we know in the real world. And one of those things happens to revolve around death.
Correct. And unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, if we look at it fortunately, we actually have clients who've lived very long lives, and many of them are in their 80s and 90s. But that being said, we also experience many deaths of clients over the course of the year because they are older and have lived a very good life, but now they have declined and have passed away. So we actually experience this a lot as to what happens to the assets once somebody passes away.
Well, one of those great beliefs is when you see on TV and movies, there must be the reading of the will.
Yeah, it must happen right after the funeral.
Right after the funeral,
everybody goes to the lawyer.
Yeah, to the lawyer, into that big oak room where the family sits around, and the lawyer pulls out the will, and he starts reading, the bequests to each person.
I always wondered who got invited to those meetings.
Well, yeah, me too, because I've been doing this 33 years. You've been doing it several decades as well.
25 years, yeah.
How many times has there been a reading of the will that you're aware of?
Never.
And we average about 25 deaths a year in the office.
Yeah, at least.
So when does the reading of the will really come into play, Marion?
So the reading of honestly, what happens is that hopefully you have created a will, because it is an extremely important document. And if you want your wishes fulfilled when you die as to what happens with your possessions, you need to have a will. So the will is written, and there is an executor named. And
I think that term is personal representative now. We want to be politically correct.
Excuse me, sorry.
Sorry.
I didn't realize it was personal. It has been personal representative for Social Security and all.
Right.
However, I didn't realize
there was executor and executrix.
Oh, got it.
And now it's just personal representative.
So there's a personal representative.
Just want to keep you honest here.
Got it. Most people as they get older, they do share this information with their children or whoever is going to be the personal representative.
Right, but
so
you're all right.
I would hope that
I didn't want to offend any lawyers that might be watching our podcast today.
Personally, I have one child, my son. My son knows where to get a copy of the will, and
but the truth being told, the will basically is the document that takes care of, I say it, the crap that's left over.
Yeah.
Because that's honestly the truth. Because if you own assets, and we encourage you to own assets a certain way, when you're owning assets, you want to be sure that everything you own has some type of a beneficiary named on it already. What the will does, the will comes into play to distribute assets after all of the other assets that existed went to the beneficiaries that were named on the document.
Correct.
So maybe you can give a couple examples of ways that we name beneficiaries on documents, Marion.
Right. So if you have a retirement account, we actually can't set up a retirement account unless there is a named beneficiary on that account. So for instance, if you are married, you typically would name your spouse as the beneficiary of your retirement account should anything happen to you. If you have children, you might name your spouse as the primary beneficiary, and then, God forbid, you and your spouse die in a common accident, you name your children as contingent beneficiaries, or it might be your grandchildren. It could be anyone, but that is what you would want to set up, naming a beneficiary and a contingent beneficiary to just allow for a common accident.
Yeah, so some people that neglect to name a beneficiary, the default becomes your estate. And if the assets are paid to your estate, then they go through a process called probate. And then the will is then read to determine how the assets are going to be distributed after you've gone through the probate process.
The probate process, however, can be lengthy at times, depending upon what's going on in the courts, because it has to go through the court system. And it actually costs money to go through a probate system as well. And the assets get advertised. They get, so that
they're posted in town hall.
They get posted such that any beneficiaries or somebody who might have claim on the assets can come forward before they're distributed.
That's right. Yeah, and so it's really important. One of the things that many people come to us for is they say, I want to avoid probate. And one of the ways that they can avoid probate is by naming beneficiaries on accounts. Now, some people will ask, well, what about a trust? Does a trust do that?
Right.
Sure, certain trusts can do that, and you want to be sure that you're finding and establishing the proper trust for the assets that you're looking to protect or preserve to a certain generation. Attorneys get involved in that. We do not write the trusts. We might provide some perspective that you might want to share with your attorney. We can even talk with your attorney.
Right.
But setting up your documents and setting up the account registrations is critically important.
There's a lot of confusion about trusts, however, and we encounter this all the time. One point to remember is that a retirement account cannot go into a trust, into the name of a trust. A trust can be named as the beneficiary of a retirement account, but it can't go into the name of a trust unless all that money comes out of the retirement account and you pay taxes on it. Then it could go into the name.
Yeah, and you probably don't want to do that.
No.
So now that goes back to the question, so what happens, so who goes to the reading of the will?
You don't have a reading of the will.
Well, but there is a reading of the will when you are wealthy and when you own property, for instance, or farmland, or jewelry, or artwork, or those types of things. So oftentimes, let's say you lived in some castle and you have these fancy vases or vases, I don't know the proper term, pictures and sofas and all this ornate stuff that's been passed down from generation to generation.
And jewelry is a prime consideration.
Yeah, you generally don't have a registered ownership to more than one person on those things, if ownership at all. But if they're part of your house, they're part of your possessions. And so that's where you start to list off assets. Or perhaps you own property that's just in your name and you want to leave property or cattle or whatever it is that you want to leave. But
I suggest that if you do have jewelry or items in your house that you want a specific person to have, designate that with that person in advance.
Absolutely.
We have clients.
Go
ahead.
So we have a client that has 2 children, and his children are in their 40s or 50s right now. And he has said to them, look, if there's anything here in the house that you want, I want you to put, and he handed one of them a sheet of red dots and one of a sheet of green dots. I want you to put the colored dot, your colored dot under the item that you want. So that when I die, it's going to be clear you got the red dots, you got the green dots. The stuff that doesn't have dots, clearly you didn't want it anyways. Take whatever you want. You guys can divvy it up amongst yourselves. But it makes things a lot easier.
Certainly does.
And
jewelry, the same thing.
Same thing with jewelry. Designate it, and you can list it. But here's one thing that we see happen a lot, and I have to remind clients when they come in, maybe some new clients that have come to us who have written up wills. And in their wills, they list names of people, 10,000 to this person, 5,000 to this person, 2,000 to that person, and the lists go on. I will tell you, chances are, in many cases, all of those people that you agonized on who was going to get each allocation, chances are they may not get anything. And that's because that allocation of dollars that you've listed in the will, that comes after all of your assets that had beneficiaries get distributed out.
Exactly. Yeah. So there might be nothing left. It's actually a much better choice to set up percentages to go to people as well. Because the other problem that can happen, if things do go through the will, let's say for instance that outside of your financial assets you have a house, and the house is just in your name, and thus it will go through the will. And so you have now named people that you've designated that you want to get a certain dollar figure. And perhaps, it's you have 50,000 to this person, 50,000 to that person. And then at the end you have some, and the remainder goes to my son. Well, perhaps you expected that half of the money would go to your son. However, if you have put down that I want so-and-so to have $50,000 and someone else to have $50,000 and another $100,000, what if your house is only worth $200,000?
Right, so you make it a percentage. And you say,
That's
I
right.
want person A to get 30%, person B to get 40%, the person C to get 30%, and
Correct.
it's easy. That way we don't have to value what the house is before we figure out, it's percentages. That's what you should be looking at.
Right, because, at some point you might downsize and go to a smaller house.
Absolutely, and that's what we call financial advice in a language you can understand. We will be back again next week with more dollars and cents and financial advice for you. But if now is the time for you to get serious about your financial planning and investment management needs, I hope you'll give the office a call. It's 978-531-8108. That's 978-531-8108. Or you can visit us on the web, freedmanfinancial.com. That's Freedman.
2 E's and a D.
Financial.com. All you got to do is go to the bottom of any page on our website, by the way, and sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Put in your name, your email address, and you'll start to get it every Friday at 10:30. If you want to learn about the types of clients we serve, how we work, what our fees are, anything you want to know, our process, everything, it's all on the website. I hope you'll take a look. I hope you enjoy your weekend.
Have a wonderful summer, too. Summer weather.
That's right. And, next week, I'm going to be away. So you've got
Lucky
Marion
you.
and Christian. So we'll see you back next week with more financial advice in a language you can understand. Have a great day, everybody.
Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
During today's Dollars and Cents episode with Freedman Financial, your hosts may have discussed specific financial planning and investment ideas that are for general information only and not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations. Please remember that investing involves risk and may include loss of principal. Although the money market fund seeks to preserve the value of your investment at $1 per share, it is possible to lose money by investing in the fund. Always consult a certified financial planner professional, qualified attorney, or tax advisor prior to investing to determine what is appropriate for you. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC.